Can you imagine a grandmother who cooks for her neighbors at Christmas, takes care of abandoned cats, and provides shelter for the elderly? Now imagine discovering that this same kind-hearted woman kept 7 dead bodies buried in her backyard. This is the true story of Dorothea Puente, one of America's most disturbing serial killers. For years, Dorothea had built up a perfect image of herself as a caring caregiver in Sacramento, California. She welcomed vulnerable seniors into her boarding house, providing them with a home and regular meals. But there was a sinister pattern. Her guests had a habit of mysteriously disappearing, always with plausible explanations, visiting relatives in Mexico, moving to other cities, or simply leaving without warning. What made Dorothea even more terrifying was her ability to deceive. She not only deceived her victims, but also social workers, neighbors, and even authorities. And there is a macabre detail that haunts this case to this day. During the Christmas festivities, Dorothea would gift her neighbors with portions of cooked meat. The origin of this meat remains a disturbing mystery that has never been fully clarified. How did such a seemingly kind woman manage to systematically kill people in her care for over a decade? And what finally exposed her horrific crimes? If you are not yet subscribed to our channel, join our community now and don't miss any fascinating cases like this one. Dorothea Puente's downfall began with a worried phone call. On November 11, 1988, a Sacramento social worker contacted the police to report the disappearance of Alvaro Montoya, a 51-year-old man diagnosed with schizophrenia. Alvaro had disappeared without a trace, and all leads pointed to the boarding house where he lived. Detective John Cabrera was assigned to investigate what appeared to be a routine case. When he arrived at the address, he found himself looking like a fairy tale property, an elegant Victorian home with a pale facade, surrounded by an ornate black iron fence, windows decorated with delicate lace curtains, and Christmas lights twinkling in the driveway. When Cabrera rang the doorbell, he was greeted by a woman in her 60s with a motherly appearance and a warm smile. Dorothea Puente was impeccably dressed and spoke with the gentleness of someone dedicated to caring for the elderly. When the detective explained the reason for his visit and requested permission to inspect the property, she showed no hesitation or nervousness. "Of course, officer. You can come in and see whatever you need," she replied with disconcerting naturalness. The interior of the residence confirmed the first impression of a carefully maintained home. Small decorative objects were strategically placed: porcelain dolls, delicate vases, hand-embroidered napkins, and framed photographs. Despite the number of items, everything was arranged harmoniously, conveying a sense of comfort and domestic tranquility. After inspecting all the internal rooms without finding any irregularities, the police turned their attention to the backyard located in the southeast part of the property. It was there that something caught the attention of the experienced detective. Cabrera, the ground showed clear signs of having been recently disturbed, with the earth softer and irregularities visible in the terrain. Cabrera instructed his colleagues to get tools from the patrol car, while he grabbed a shovel and began digging around the suspicious area. Within minutes, his tool brought to the surface something that made his blood run cold: fragments of tissue, mixed with decaying organic matter. Determined to find the truth, he intensified his digging. Then something happened that would scar him for the rest of his life. As he dug deeper into the hole, his shovel hit something that initially looked like a tree root. He reached down into the hole, grabbed the object tightly, and pulled hard. To his utter horror, it was not a root at all. It was unmistakably a human bone. The discovery caused an immediate commotion among all the police officers present. The noise of the activity attracted Dorothea, who came out of the house and walked calmly to where they were working. When they informed her that they had found possible human remains, her reaction was instantaneous and dramatic. She put both hands to her face in an expression of shock that Cabrera would later describe as too theatrical to be genuine. The excavation continued until they found part of a human foot still wearing a shoe. There was no longer any doubt about the macabre nature of the discovery. Cabrera immediately contacted police headquarters, and it was decided that investigations would continue. The following day, with specialized equipment and a full forensic team, the boarding house was placed under strict police surveillance around the clock. Interestingly, at this early stage, Dorothea was not yet considered a prime suspect in the case. Investigators believed that she might be a key witness, or, at worst, have some knowledge of what had happened on her property. The next morning, a Saturday, a full team of forensic anthropologists, accompanied by experts from the county medical examiner's office and forensic technicians, arrived at the site. They brought heavy equipment and specialized tools for a professional and systematic excavation. As some of the initial work had already been carried out the day before, it did not take long for the remainder of the first corpse to be completely exhumed. The remains apparently belonged to an elderly woman, as evidenced by the gray hair still clinging to the partially decomposed skull. As the professional excavations proceeded meticulously, journalists from major outlets such as the Los Angeles Times began to surround the property. The news spread with astonishing speed, and soon a growing crowd of curious onlookers gathered around the guest house. Teenagers and neighbors climbed trees in adjacent yards to watch the police work from afar, creating an almost circus-like atmosphere around the unfolding tragedy. The massive presence of police cars, forensic equipment, and official vehicles had transformed the previously quiet street into a veritable crime scene. But when the first body was completely removed from the ground, the mood became visibly more somber and apprehensive. The crowd watching from afar began to adopt a more serious demeanor, gradually understanding the true gravity of the situation. During this second day of systematic excavations, even more disturbing discoveries came to light. 3 more bodies were found buried beneath a carefully positioned concrete slab, followed by a 5th corpse located beneath a small decorative gazebo in the side yard of the property. Each new discovery exponentially intensified the horror of the situation and dramatically increased the pressure on Dorothea Puente. Investigators began to realize that they were not dealing with an isolated crime, but possibly a series of carefully planned and executed murders. It was precisely at this critical moment in the investigation that Dorothea made a decision that would completely change the course of the case. Calmly approaching Detective John Cabrera, she asked permission to briefly leave for the Clarion Hotel, conveniently located next door to the boarding house. "I need to get some coffee, officer. This whole situation is making me very nervous," she explained, her voice slightly shaky, but still maintaining her characteristic composure. Dorothea was impeccably dressed in a striking cherry red overcoat, vibrant purple shoes, and elegantly carried a pink umbrella color combination that made her easily identifiable from a distance. Cabrera, completely focused on the ongoing excavations and the discoveries that were accumulating, authorized his departure without hesitation. He could not have imagined the devastating consequences that this seemingly innocent decision would bring to the investigation. Instead of fulfilling her promise to go into the hotel for the aforementioned coffee, Dorothea walked straight to the taxi rank in front of the establishment and determinedly boarded a vehicle bound for the other side of the city. Her first stop was a bar she frequented regularly, where she methodically consumed 4 generous shots of vodka mixed with orange juice. After a few hours of drinking and apparently gathering her thoughts, she boarded another taxi to the nearby town of Stockton, where she purchased a bus ticket to Los Angeles. The interstate trip lasted approximately 6 hours, during which Dorothea had ample time to reflect on her situation and plan her next moves. During this entire escape journey, she carried $3,000 in cash, carefully stored in her purse, a considerable amount for the time, clearly evidencing that she had planned her escape significantly in advance. As Dorothea put hundreds of miles between herself and the incriminating digs, 2 more bodies were discovered on her property, bringing the total to 7. John Cabrera, initially excited by the discoveries that promised to definitively clear up the case, began to become genuinely concerned when he realized that more than 4 hours had passed and the landlady had not returned. When the excavations were finally completed, a terrifying total of 7 bodies had been discovered on Dorothea's property. Each of these people had a personal story, dreams cut short, and tragically, they all shared one thing in common: they had trusted Dorothea Puente during their most vulnerable moments. The first victim in chronological order was Betty Mae Palmer, a 78-year-old woman who arrived at the boarding house on October 14, 1986. Further investigation would reveal that Dorothea had meticulously forged identity documents using Betty's photograph, probably after her murder. Approximately 2 months after Betty's disappearance, the official address for receiving her Social Security checks was mysteriously changed to that of the boarding house. The most shocking aspect was the discovery that Dorothea had systematically forged Betty's signature in order to fraudulently cash a benefit check for a substantial amount of $7,000. Betty's body was found in a state of complete dismemberment, missing her head, hands, and legs, carefully buried beneath a religious statue of Saint Francis of Assisi. strategically positioned just a few feet from the boarding house's front sidewalk. Leona Carpenter, also age 78, became the second chronological victim. She was admitted to the boarding house in December 1986, immediately after being discharged from a prolonged hospital stay. Over the following months, Leona became increasingly debilitated and bedridden on a sofa in the common room, until she disappeared completely in February 1987. James Gallup, age 62, represented the third identified victim. He had moved into the boarding house in February 1987 after a heroic battle with a near-fatal heart attack and complex surgery to remove a brain tumor. Tragically, although he survived these serious medical conditions, he did not survive the special care of Dorothea Puente. Vera Faye Martin, aged 61, was sent to live at the boarding house on October 2, 1987. Vera had been in regular and affectionate telephone contact with her daughter, but suddenly she stopped giving any news or answers. When her body was discovered buried inside a metal shed in the backyard, she was still wearing her personal wristwatch, which surprisingly continued to work normally. Dorothy Miller, a 65-year-old Native American woman, was placed in Dorothea's supposed protective care in late October 1987. Dorothy was last seen by her caseworker, who observed her calmly smoking a cigarette on the front porch of the boarding house. She was known for her serious alcohol problems and a peculiar habit of reciting melancholy poems about lost love. Benjamin Fink, a 55-year-old recovering alcoholic, arrived at the boarding house in March 1988. His condition was extremely complex and delicate, and he received regular weekly visits from his devoted brother. In April, the brother was surprisingly informed that Benjamin had suddenly left, causing the family concern, but not immediately raising suspicions. Finally, there was Alvaro Montoya, the 51-year-old schizophrenic whose disappearance had originally triggered the entire police investigation. Alvaro arrived at the boarding house in February 1988 and was often observed by the other residents talking animatedly to himself. Witnesses reported that he affectionately called Dorothea Mother, demonstrating the childlike trust he had in her. While Dorothea remained at large somewhere in California, detailed investigations into her boarding house revealed disturbing aspects of how she operated her deadly business. Apparently, she specialized in renting out first-floor rooms to people in need of special care and medical attention, focusing primarily on alcoholics, the mentally disabled, and the physically challenged. When investigators meticulously searched Dorothea's personal room, they found glaring evidence of a lifestyle incompatible with her reported income: expensive imported perfumes, high-quality silk and chiffon dresses, elegant jewelry, and other items, clearly beyond the purchasing power of an ordinary pensioner. Among the most incriminating evidence was a handwritten note that immediately caught the investigators' attention: a piece of paper containing the initials of each identified victim, carefully listed alongside the monetary amounts Dorothea had managed to extract from each of them. A quick financial analysis revealed that she was illegally receiving at least $5,000 a month from the dead tenants, an extraordinarily substantial sum at the time, which converted to today's values would represent approximately $30,000 a month of fraudulent income. The surviving tenants provided valuable information about the strictly controlled regime that Dorothea maintained at the boarding house. Each resident paid $350 a month, an amount that theoretically guaranteed a single room and 2 balanced meals a day. However, the rules she imposed were draconianly strict. If a tenant missed a meal for any reason, they were not allowed to eat again until the next designated time, and literally went hungry, as it was strictly forbidden to enter the kitchen outside. The hours arbitrarily set by Dorothea. Investigations into Dorothea's personal habits revealed a methodically calculated strategy for identifying and luring her future victims. It was discovered that she regularly took long walks to the cheapest bars frequented by lonely people in the city of Sacramento. Her favorite establishment was Harry's Lounge, a disreputable bar where she was frequently observed by staff strategically chatting with lonely and seemingly vulnerable elderly men. She consistently paid for these men's drinks and skillfully steered the conversations toward issues related to their personal financial situations. According to the patterns identified by the investigators, if Dorothea considered a particular elderly person worth the investment, that is, he received substantial government benefits and had no close family or concerned friends, she would warmly invite him to reside in her supposedly welcoming boarding house. John Terry, a retired man of 67, dramatically corroborated this predatory strategy when he testified that during a casual conversation at the bar, Dorothea had asked him specific and pointed questions about his financial situation and sources of income. She subsequently telephoned him repeatedly over the course of several weeks, persistently trying to persuade him to move into the boarding house. Fortunately, John flatly declined all invitations, a decision that very likely saved his life. Extensive investigations into Dorothea's personal history revealed a life trajectory marked by decades of systematic manipulation, compulsive lying, and progressively more serious criminal activity. It was discovered that she had grown up in the city of Redlands, California, in an extremely dysfunctional and traumatic family. Her mother, Trudy May, had approximately 18 children from various relationships, and although Dorothea often claimed to be the youngest child in the family, documentary investigations proved that she was actually the sixth child in order of birth. Her father, Jesse James Gray, was a deeply troubled man and chronic alcoholic who during his frequent bouts of drunkenness would dramatically threaten to kill himself in front of all his young children. Jesse died prematurely of tuberculosis when Dorothea was only 8 years old. Tragically, just a year later, her mother was killed in a fatal motorcycle accident. With the traumatic loss of both parents at such an early age, Dorothea and her siblings were immediately sent to a state orphanage, where she would later report suffering systematic sexual abuse by the institution's caretakers. Throughout her troubled childhood and adolescence, Dorothea was constantly moved between foster homes. Official census records revealed that at age 13, she was living with an unknown family in Napa, California. At age 16, her fragmentary school records indicated that she was living in Los Angeles, and less than a year later she was moved again to Olympia, Washington. A few days after her spectacular escape from Sacramento, as the American public was beginning to understand Dorothea Puente's true identity and dangerousness through intensive media coverage, her whereabouts were discovered in almost cinematic fashion. The person directly responsible for this crucial discovery was Charles Wilkes, a 59-year-old retired carpenter who was enjoying a quiet afternoon drinking beer at a tavern called the Monte Carlo, located in the bustling center of Los Angeles. Charles noticed an elegantly dressed lady sitting alone next to him at the bar. At first glance, she realized that she was a meticulously well-dressed elderly woman wearing a bright red overcoat that caught her eye, purple leather shoes, and carrying an expensive designer handbag. Without any ceremony or introduction, the woman confidently ordered a vodka mixed with orange juice, the exact same drink she had consumed during her initial escape from Sacramento. She then politely introduced herself as Donna Johansson, claiming to be originally from Sacramento and dramatically explaining that her husband had died the previous month. To Charles, this sophisticated elderly woman had exactly the typical profile of a wealthy widow who had inherited a considerable fortune and was now looking for a new romantic relationship before her life came to a natural end. The conversation between the two flowed naturally, and Donna mentioned that her initial stay in Los Angeles had not started out favorably. She explained that the taxi driver responsible for transporting her from the airport to the Royal Viking Motel, where she was temporarily staying, had inexplicably left with all her personal luggage. Further demonstrating her supposed vulnerability, she showed off her elegant purple shoes, which were visibly damaged with the heels completely broken. Charles felt genuine compassion for the elderly woman's seemingly difficult situation, sincerely believing that life was being particularly cruel to her. Moved by this spontaneous empathy, he immediately took the damaged shoes to a cobbler conveniently located across the street to have them properly repaired. In November of 1988, shortly after her capture and forced extradition to Sacramento, specialized investigators subjected Dorothea to intensive and prolonged interrogations, hoping to obtain a complete confession that would definitively clarify all aspects of the case. Although investigators were able to extract several important pieces of information and partial revelations during these interrogations, Dorothea remained adamantly firm in her categorical refusal to confess any direct involvement in the crimes uncovered. During the following month, forensic authorities were able to officially identify an additional body that had been discovered 2 years earlier by a recreational fisherman in the Sacramento River. The corpse was carefully packed inside a makeshift plywood coffin and was later identified as Everson Gilmouth, the 77-year-old man who had mysteriously disappeared from the boarding house. On March 31, 1989, Dorothea Puente made her first official appearance in Sacramento Municipal Court. She was impeccably dressed in a conservative blue dress and wore an elegant necklace of genuine pearls, maintaining her appearance as a respectable lady even in the face of the most serious circumstances. In a surprisingly cold and calculated manner, she formally pleaded not guilty to all 9 murder charges brought against her by the prosecution. It would take exactly 4 years of meticulous preparation for all of the physical evidence to be properly analyzed, catalogued, and organized for presentation to the court. The trial was officially scheduled for February of 1993, but due to the unusually intense media coverage that the case had generated specifically in Sacramento, the judge in charge strategically decided to move the trial to Monterey, California. During the lengthy trial, prosecutor John O'Mara systematically presented Dorothea as a fundamentally greedy woman and a serial predator who had methodically murdered her vulnerable tenants with the specific goal of stealing their regular government checks. The 2 criminal defense attorneys, Peter Vlaughton and Kevin Klimo, strategically argued that all of the tenants had died of completely natural causes related to their pre-existing health conditions. They explained that Dorothea had avoided contacting emergency medical services not to cover up murders, but simply because she did not want to draw official attention to herself, considering that she was operating the boarding house in clear violation of her previous probation. After exactly 1 full year of meticulously analyzing all the evidence presented, recorded testimony, and legal arguments, the jury came to the definitive conclusion that Dorothea Puente was unequivocally guilty of the murders of Dorothy Miller, Benjamin Fink, and Leona Carpenter. However, frustratingly for the prosecution, they were unable to reach a unanimous verdict on the other 6 murder charges, including specifically the case of Everson Gilmouth, despite direct and detailed testimony from the laborer who had helped dump the body in the river. Superior Court Judge Michael Verga was forced to officially declare a mistrial specifically on these unresolved charges. The frustrating inability to reach a completely unanimous verdict on these additional cases sparked heated public debate, as many legal observers and community members firmly believed that there was more than enough evidence to convict her of the additional murders. On December 10, 1993, Dorothea Puente, then 64 years old, was officially sentenced to life in prison without any possibility of future parole. She was immediately transferred to the Central California Correctional Facility for Women, located near the city of Chowchilla, recognized as the largest women's correctional institution in the entire United States. Throughout her subsequent years of incarceration, Dorothea consistently maintained her claim of complete innocence, repeatedly insisting that all of the people found buried in her backyard had died exclusively of natural causes, without any participation or intervention on her part. On March 27, 2011, Dorothea Puente passed away at the age of 82, due to natural causes directly related to her advanced aging. Today, Dorothea Puente is universally recognized as one of the most deadly and calculating serial killers in American criminal history. Although she has not been legally convicted in all of the cases investigated, the Sacramento Police Department continues to officially consider her the prime suspect in each of the murders discovered. Conservative estimates suggest that the actual number of her victims may range from 9 to 15 innocent people, all vulnerable and marginalized individuals who at one time or another naively trusted the care of the woman the tabloid media dubbed the lovely grandmother of death. Dorothea Puente's deeply disturbing story serves as a chilling reminder that ultimate evil doesn't always present itself with obviously threatening features or intimidating appearances. Sometimes, the deadliest danger comes carefully disguised as maternal kindness, using warm smiles and reassuring promises of care to systematically lure in its unsuspecting victims. Perhaps the most frightening aspect of this entire story is the disconcerting ease with which she managed to deceive not only her direct victims, but also an entire welfare system that is supposed to rigorously protect the most vulnerable and defenseless members of our society. If you followed this disturbing story all the way to the end, don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more content on fascinating criminal cases. Also, leave your suggestions in the comments for other cases you'd like to see explored here. Your active participation is essential for us to continue investigating and presenting the darkest and most intriguing stories of human nature.